The Leica Q3, a $6,000 luxury camera out of stock. The Nikon ZF, a full-frame retro camera and depending on where you live, also almost out of stock. The Fujifilm X100V successor, the Fujifilm X100VI, should have been released this year, but isn't. And the camera which is highly requested, especially by the Sony community, is the Sony RX1RIII. But there's currently no sign that that camera will be released. But if all of these cameras has been released in 2023 and were all available and in stock, which camera would you have bought this year? Or would you have bought a different one? Hi, and thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Furk, aka Phil, and today I want to have a quick brief look why all these cameras are currently not in stock or why they are not released yet. Let's have a quick look at the Leica Q3. This camera has been released in May 2023 and it was sold out pretty fast. Baby is crying. Where was I? You might know that the past few years the Leica Q2 had hit social media quite heavily and there's basically a big hype about this camera, and when this one was released, the Q3, the hype is still here and therefore a lot of people are willing to spend $6,000 for this camera, including me. But since Leica is a small company compared to the big camera brands, just a quick comparison here, Leica has I think about 2,000 employees, and if you compare that with Fujifilm, Canon or Sony, which I will blend into the screen for you to see, it's quite understandable from an economical point of view that Leica can't meet the international demands like all the other brands. Therefore people are putting themselves on a waiting list to get this camera. And currently the waiting time is up to 6 months, but people want to get their hands into this kind of camera. But as I mentioned, the reason or the bottleneck why the Q3 is not vastly available to everyone is basically the size of the company. Now, if you look at the Nikon ZF, here I assume that Nikon did a market research and did their forecast how many units they probably will sell after the release. By the way, I'm currently recording on the ZF, but since this camera is also selling like hotcake, do you say that in English? Anyways, it sells quite good. Depending on the country you're living in, the ZF is out of stock or the kit combo is not available with the 40mm SE lens. This camera, the ZF, is also a camera which has a positive social media marketing, since a lot of people like the Nikon retro design and also because Nikon hits a market gap regarding this retro camera because it's full frame, and until now only Fujifilm offered retro cameras, but these are all APC cameras. I made a lot of videos about the Nikon ZF on my channel here, and overall this camera is very well. Therefore the demand is still high on this one. But I think moving into 2024, Nikon will ramp up their production, and I guess therefore next year the ZF will be more available to the masses who wants to buy this camera. Now moving to the two cameras which were unfortunately not released in 2023, and the first one I want to talk about is the Fujifilm X100VI. I'm calling it the X100VI because of the iterations. If you look at the original one, that was the X100. The second one was the X100S, S for second. The third one was X100T, T for third. The fourth one was X100F, F for fourth, and the fifth one is the X100V, but V stands for the Roman numeral. Everyone calls it the X100V instead of the X105 or Mark V. For me it's funnily similar to the iPhone X. Apple wanted that people call that iPhone the iPhone 10, but everyone called it the X, whatever. But therefore I guess that the next X100 camera will be the X100 Mark VI. So therefore I'm calling it the 6. And that camera was expected for this year, but looks like that Fujifilm has some economical problems, supply chains whatsoever. If you look at the release lineup of Fujifilm, which cameras were released this year, it was quite little. There was only the middle format camera and the XS20, and all the highly expected cameras like the X100VI and also the X Pro 4 has not been released this year. And I assume that based on the problems that Fujifilm was not available to meet the demands of the X100V, that they are still struggling regarding supply chain or something like that. But still, I guess that the X100VI will come, and my expectations is that that camera will get the X-T5 sensor, of course with this fixed lens, same body as the X100s before that. Fixed lens could be the same 23mm f2 from the X100V, but it could also be possible that they put in a 28mm full frame equivalent into the next X100 camera. Why am I thinking that? Because of the sensor of the X-T5. That's a 40 megapixel sensor, so basically a high resolution one, and therefore you can crop in quite a bit. Basically that's the megapixel count of the Leica Q2, and there you are also able to crop in massively already. And also when you have a 28mm full frame equivalent lens on that X100 successor, that would be indirectly the competitor of the Leica Q3, because the Leica Q3 is a high megapixel full frame camera with 60 megapixels and also have the 28mm focal length as a lens. But that's just my personal thoughts. Let's see what will happen next year and with what specs Fujifilm will surprise us. The only speculation I currently have, which I fear might come true, is regarding the price. My local camera store just said to me that the X100V price has been bumped up from Fujifilm. I think around $2,000 right now. If you look at the prices when it was released, it was $1,500. It has been creeped up since that hype. I think it's not unrealistic to say that Fujifilm is aware about this hype around the X100 lineup and therefore will try to milk that cash cow to put a higher price tag on that. Because in the beginning, I guess that people will still buy the X100 successor, even if it's around $2,000. But yeah, time will tell. Comment below if you would buy the X100 successor for $2,000, because there you are basically in full frame territory. There's a lot of options when you look at that price tag. Now moving things to the RX1R Mark III. There is no sign of any release for that camera right now. The RX Mark II is currently quite popular on social media here on YouTube because it's a full frame compact camera with the 35mm size lens, and it's really compact. I like that form factor, but that camera was released I think in 2015 and hasn't been updated since then. And I personally have my own speculations why this camera is not released yet or won't be released. First of all, I made some notes here. If you look at the sensor of the RX1R Mark II, that camera had the same sensor like the Sony A7R Mark II. Both that cameras were released in 2015 and had that 42 megapixel sensor. If you look at the Sony lineup right now, the only high megapixel sensor which Sony offers is currently 60 megapixels, and it sits in the Sony A7R5 and the latest release, the Sony A7CR. Especially because of the A7CR release, I think that the RX1R Mark III won't never be released because Sony profits more with the A7CR. Why? It's because of the interchangeable lenses, and that's the main reason why it might not be released, because A7CR is an interchangeable lens systems, and with every lens Sony can generate revenue. That's not possible for a fixed lens camera, and I think Sony is aware about that. Also, the price for the Mark III would be quite high. The Mark II is still listed on the Sony website for over $4,000. That's ridiculous right now. But even used, it's quite high price, between $2,000 or $3,000, depending on conditions, etc. And therefore, I guess that the minimum price of the Mark III would be at least $4,000. I think higher, between 4,000 and 5,000, and then you are entering Leica territory regarding the price tag. And I think for Sony it would be quite hard to sell at that kind of price point, the Mark III, because if you look at the A7CR price tag. That's around, depending on where you live, $3,500 roundabout. If you throw in a fast lens, you will pay around $4,000 minimum with a fast lens. But let's see what Sony will do in the future, because we're still talking about Sony right now. If you look how many cameras Sony released the past 2 years, that was ridiculous. And I have the feeling that Sony is just spraying all the camera releases and hope that customers just pick any kind of camera from Sony as long as it is a Sony camera. So there's perhaps still hope that the Mark III will be released. But as I already mentioned, I think main reason why it's not been released yet is the missing sales about lenses if you buy a point and shoot camera. But the Leica Q lineup and the X100 lineup shows that there's a demand for fixed lens cameras, and let's see if Sony will enter that game. Now for me, in 2023 I bought the Leica Q3 and the Nikon ZF, but which camera would I have bought if all these 4 cameras were released and available? And I have to say that the Leica Q3 here, I might have still bought it even if the X100VI has been released, but it would be a much harder choice, because if my speculation is correct or would be correct, yeah, it would be harder to choose between the two of them. But still, the Leica has its own magic. I had 2 Leica Qs before this Q3, that was the original Q, and the Q2 monochrome, and every time I sold these Q cameras I missed having a Q, and therefore my decision was pretty settled when I saw the Q3 was released and put in my order for the waiting list. I was lucky enough to get my Q3 1 month after the release and having my fun with the Leica Q3 so far. Regarding the Nikon ZF, I'm not sure if I would have bought it if the other cameras would available. I mentioned that in my previous videos already. Other users have similar feelings like me, but that's just a matter of preference. The Nikon ZF is relatively big and bulky. It has its own charm, and I like that camera a lot, especially the black and white mode. But I'm a person who values smaller bodies, but still have full frame sensors. That's quite niche. Right now, there are only a handful of cameras which meet that criteria. When I saw the previews on the ZF, I assumed that the camera was relatively compact, but it's not. And let's say if the Sony RX, how is it called? Sony RX1RIII Mark III would be currently on the market and available, I would definitely prefer the Sony one over the Nikon ZF if I compared it in a camera store live next to another. But the Sony is not released, and I'm having fun with my Nikon ZF, so things seems to work out. As a quick conclusion, I think the Leica Q3 I might still have bought, in addition to the X100VI perhaps. And yeah, regarding the Nikon ZF, if the Sony was released and available, I might have bought that instead of the ZF, as already mentioned, because of the form factor. But in reality, we have a different market situation, which camera is available. Write in the comments below which camera would you have bought in 2023 if everything was released and in stock. And if you're still here, thank you very much for watching. You're the one who deserves the like. Check the affiliate links below in the description if you want to support my channel. And if you want to know what the comments thinks about the Nikon ZF and different ZF videos, just click on this one.